Dylan, welcome to Dearest Queers. Thank you for being our first live guest. Yeah, just thank you for being here. I really appreciate it, and would love to hear like the question that you are bringing this week, this evening.
Thanks. Thanks for doing this. I'm happy to be here. Um, my question is, I realize that I have been, well, first of all, a huge, people pleaser, but to the extent that I've become a stranger to myself even, and have been very much like basing life choices and all kinds of self-worth on what other people are giving me back, external validation, what I think even just like the generalized other will approve of. And it's just been very alienating. So I'm trying to figure out how to come back to myself and figure out what I want.
Mhm. Absolutely, great question. When you talk about alienating, are you talking about like alienating from yourself, or in your feeling that in your relationships as well?
Well, I think they're connected, right? I mostly meant alienating from myself and not knowing sort of who I am, or like realizing my worth, maybe not having a good sense of self-worth and self-respect. But those are very much connected, in that if I don't know who I am, like what am I bringing to other people who need me and need maybe my gifts, or what I could have to offer. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, like, tell me a little bit about like what your relationship with yourself is like right
There's just sort of like a lot of doubt and even emptiness, I guess, right? Because I haven't developed any practices or like guideposts for how do I make decisions? How do I tap into my own body and mind to figure out uh, what I think I should do, right? It's always sort of just like me projecting outward. So, I think like I do just enough to get by. But like in terms of holding myself to like taking care of myself and doing extra things that I do feel like I should do or do want, um, like I don't know that I frankly always respect myself enough to hold myself to those. Like I'm good in my word to other people, or at least I try to be, but I don't keep my own promises to myself because I rank myself at like the bottom of the to-do list.
now? Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I first just like want to reflect that your self-awareness about all these pieces though, like is, I mean, it's huge, right? Because that's like the very first piece is that like recognizing that all of this is happening in the first place. And so I feel like I heard this somewhere in like stuff I was consuming this week, but just that like because you have the awareness, like you're already in the process of it. So this thing about like needing to start it, or like I need to do this thing, or like you're already there, like you're already doing it because like you have this awareness. So I just like want to reflect that back, that like I think sometimes this is like the like self-judgment can like really come along, that like I'm not doing all of these things perfectly yet, instead of like really beginning to recognize like, yo, one, I'm on this call, so like I know that like there's like I'm getting support and I'm getting help, and then two, um is that I have like there's that's just like huge self-awareness. I feel like that's like the first piece, and then you have this question that you're asking, how do I begin like bringing in these like little pieces to like shift my relationship with myself. So I feel like you said many important things around right, the like not keeping promises to yourself, like that feels really really important. And so like I don't know, like do you have an example or like, so if you say like every morning before I get on my laptop for work, I want to like sit in silence for 10 minutes and see what's going on with me. Like what like comes up to get, like what is so easy about diverting that into like something else?
Hmm. Yeah, I know that's a great example of like setting boundaries between my work and my personal life, or all kinds of other boundaries too. But yeah, I mean, even if I set an intention, it seems like when I wake up in the morning, especially, or something distracts me, like it's so easy to like just let those very easily go. I don't know how to like keep like set reminders for myself or something, or like even have that baseline of like, no, this is important to prioritize. And so yeah, it's just it's just really easy because again I'm so focused on pleasing other people that I'm like, well, if I take 10 minutes to meditate or even cook myself breakfast or whatever basic things, wash my face, sometimes it gets as basic as that if I'm being completely honest, right? Like take
Yeah,
a shower. It's like, well, those things will only benefit me. Whereas, if I go and answer everyone's emails right now, they'll be happy because I will have solved a problem for them and they'll see me as a good worker and, professional and responsible and all these things that I want other people to see me as. But, apparently I don't care if I see myself as like a person with good habits or like clean or
yeah,
has who has fed themselves, you
yeah,
know.
yeah, totally. Yeah, well, it's that like the sort of orientation to the external validation or like getting, um, yeah, and a part of you knows because again, you're here asking the question is how do you reorient that inwards? And I think that the answer to that is like small and slowly, right? So I think that this expectation, if like all of a sudden we're gonna like move from being, if the majority of our life, if 75% of our life is like people pleasing and looking outward, to then suddenly expect that I'm gonna show up for myself consistently 100% of the time, it's just really unrealistic, and you're like setting yourself up for failure, which is what, or not doing, not following through. You use the word failure, but then that just builds on itself because then there's this, I'm guessing, some like internal story about like, well, see, I like can't even like wash my face, or I can't even do this, or like can't even blah blah blah, and then
Yeah.
it's just sort of like rag on yourself about that. I think when like the holistic psychologist of like Instagram account that I love a lot, like she talks a lot about this idea of like self betrayal, and that like healing that, like a key to that is keeping one promise to yourself a day. And so I think when we talk about was something small, like that's it. And so like if you say I'm gonna wash my face before this meeting, then like effing wash your face before the meeting. Um, or like like whatever thing that like you want to give to yourself, um like hold one of those a day. And I think that like the hope then is that like the balance begins to shift in the direction, so then you're doing three of those to like seven external, or four of those to whatever. um yeah, and that like that slowly begins to change.
Yeah.
But it there is this behavioral piece to it, but like in the external looking, there's also this like what needs, either like emotionally, like what needs to shift or like be given attention, that how other people feel about you is more important than how you feel about yourself. And what um yeah, I know, like a real question about like other feelings of just like not good feelings towards yourself that like need to be like sat with and like felt. So whether that's a like anxiety to like not be doing, like do the to wash the face and not, and before the email, like sitting with that, whether it's like self-hatred that comes up, and just um, yeah, like what, because we could talk about behavioral change all day, but if there isn't this emotional component to it that's like really being asked, because that's the underlying thing that's like driving us all.
I appreciate, and I think that that point is really right because, as open as I was trying to be and like taking that advice, I knew in my, like, I love that you say, the stories that we tell ourselves are very strong. And even as you were saying, well, keep this one promise to yourself, I was already anticipating, like, well, I'll tell myself that it's insignificant, or I'll still tell, like, I'll tell this story about myself that, well, even if you do it for one day, you're not going to do it for two, and things like that. So I think that that's great advice that I will try to take, but also I'm very cognizant of, like, there's obviously something deeper than just fulfilling behavioral promises to myself that I guess I'm trying to figure out how to work at, like, get at where the story comes from, other than, past self betrayal, which I love that term.
Yep, totally. Yeah. Well, and I feel like language is really important in the way we talk about ourselves, and just like reflecting that when you like, even about again the face washing or whatever example, and you're like that's insignificant. Like really, what you're saying is I am insignificant, because that's the promise to yourself. You know, it's not about the action or behavior. It's about the relational aspect of that choice, which is to choose oneself. And so to say that is insignificant is to say I am insignificant. Like that is the message that you, every time that promise is broken, that's the message that you give to yourself, which is very painful.
I'm feeling a lot, even as you just say it and put it that way. I'm feeling like so much in my body, like a sense of like wanting to cry, a sense of tensing up, because like I know that's true, and like hearing you say it made me have to confront it, which is what I obviously tried to avoid, even though I feel that for myself. Is like I haven't built a sense of that I am significant. Like that was hard to even just say, right?
Yeah,
And so it's like I don't think of myself who like as per someone who hates themselves or doesn't think that they're significant. But
totally.
at the same time, there's a cognitive dissonance because I obviously do have some kind of belief about that.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And I, yeah, just like I feel like a lot of tenderness for you in that, and just like I get like some of like especially as like queer and trans folks, like a lot of that like it doesn't belong to us. It's the this like it's internalized transphobia, it's internalized self-hatred, it's like it's stuff that we've like just absorbed from the outside and from folks around us, you know, but it lives in our bodies and it absolutely impacts our ability to show up for ourselves because we are treating ourselves the way we've learned, like from how others have treated us, like based on those things. um, and I feel like, you know, in my work, and I used to ask these questions and the sort of like, so what, right, what are these tangible behavioral things I can do? Or like, how can I like sort of fix this feeling of insignificance or just like worthlessness for me that like followed me around for most of my life? Um, and the answer was like just being present with it and like, and developing a practice of, um, yeah, just like presence with what it means to feel like a worthless human being, or insignificant or whatever. And um, yeah, I think sometimes in this like in like the self care talk or like even self love, there's this just a real, I think, a misunderstanding or a sort of glossing over about what the work actually means, about what self love actually is. It's like raw and gritty and like sitting with like unbelievably uncomfortable and like terrible feelings. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, and
yeah,
I
go
get
ahead.
stuck there. You know, I mean, that's I think that's absolutely right. Like I try to avoid it, but at the same time, once I do there, instead of it being productive, I allow it to be a spiral of like,
Totally.
yeah, of course you hate yourself, you know. So that balance of coming at it from a place, I mean, I guess that's where the self-love comes in, is like sit with it, but as a, you know, as a parent or whatever, you know, people that use different phrases and I don't know exactly what will work for me, but from a
Yeah.
place of like love yourself like you would love the person you love most, which is definitely not how I come at it usually by default.
Yeah, totally. Well, what happens is that when those stories, when like those feelings get activated in our body, they're rooted and tied to all of these stories. And so when we feel that, like whether it's tied to trauma or something else, when we begin to feel that feeling of worthlessness, it like kickstarts all of the stories, and then that's what happens. That's why the spiral happens. And so, you know, I would just like ask, like, is there a way to allow the feelings to come up and like pay attention to the mind, like keep it like sort of mind free? Like, is there a way to just bring, you know, that like unconditional love to it? Um, well, and like, do you know what that feels like in your body?
My instinct is to say that I don't think I've cultivated that.
Yeah, um, yeah, because that would be another, like, just in terms of talking about like presence and like getting into these feelings, you know, like finding what, like, I don't know, meditation or like YouTube or like loving kindness meditations, but like really beginning to work with like what is, even if I don't know, and that's okay, can I like be open and curious about what like the feeling of like love, like what love feels like in my body. Um, yeah, because it will be hard to hold yourself in love if like it's hard to do that if we don't know what that is or
Mm-hmm.
like what that feels like.
I think that is good. And I guess part of that is giving, like, that's not gonna just happen accidentally. So I think part of that is giving myself space and prioritizing it enough that I'm able to be grounded and like try to feel that love and in my body and get to a place of like mindfulness about it. You know, it's not going to happen like in between a meeting and a, you know, whatever, like, right, I have to um and I say this like I have some like high powered job or something, but you know, I mean, that's what's taking over my life. So in isolation there's nothing else for me to put my energy into except for myself, which I'm not doing.
Yes,
So
yes,
maybe this is in some ways the perfect time for this because I've got almost all the time in the world to try to carve out space for myself and tell myself that I can be significant for like at least 20 minutes or, you know,
yes.
even if I have to start there maybe.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that would be my like place to start is really right choosing one thing a day or like choosing one way to show up for yourself every day, whether that's like a task thing. And then I like develop really beginning this like developing this relationship with your like with your internal self, you know, around these feelings of insignificance and also like conjuring of love to be able to hold yourself through that. And I just really want to this feels important to me always. For some folks that isn't possible just where they are given in their healing journey or amounts of trauma or whatever, but like then please get support for someone who can like help hold that like container for you like while you like dip into those really intense feelings, because I don't ever want to like send someone out to, I don't want to like, you know, send someone into their trauma without like adequate support. That would be neglectful of me and just bad practice. So um, yeah, so I'd be happy to like talk offline about um, yeah, if you like want some help getting set with some different support or whatever in that.
Great. Thank you. If we have time, there's also the sort of secondary question of like, so, you know, how do I figure out what I want when I've been so externally minded? And I guess like obviously part of that is going to be like listening to myself and doing these things that we've talked about. But I'm just wondering if you have any advice for like how to think through that or like get in practice of prioritizing what I want over external validation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer isn't exactly what we talked about. I mean,
Yeah.
but like, and I, it's not the like pretty answer or like the fun one, but I this remarkable thing begins to happen is that when you prioritize yourself and sit with yourself, these choices around choosing yourself, like, um, because the very act of showing up in that way begins to sort of offset that, like the self betrayal or the self abandonment. Um, part of you, you won't be able to like do things in the same way anymore when you like begin to show up in that way. So that's my like I would just go back to that answer is like really begin to cultivate and develop that practice with yourself, and it will start to become like things will just they'll begin to shift because you're inside like internally you'll begin to shift and orient towards yourself, and then
Mhm.
your external behavior will begin to follow, or else you'll like start to feel conflicted where you're like I don't want to like you just it will when your internal world change like it will shift. I guarantee that.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's like a that's a bold step. Just like, here I'm guaranteeing. So I
Right.
just yeah, I mean that has been my experience and how I've like witnessed it in others. It's just that um yeah, every like all the like everything is already there. It's just like us like getting it's just like becoming moving into intimacy with ourselves in a different way. So
Yeah. Well, it's helpful to know from people who have gone through that process and have experience with that to tell me that, and so I can know that there's sort of like light at the end of the tunnel. Like the work will have many fold benefits through your like whole perspective. I think that's something that I can remind myself of when I start to say that like it's not significant, don't take this time.
yep.
Because I very much see even in the small, I'm pretty like new to thinking of self-work in sort of these ways we've talked about, and so but even in the past few weeks as I've been more intentional about that, I've noticed how it's like the once you have the realization, even though you knew it intellectually before and it was almost a cliche and you were like, yeah, I've heard that a million times, until you have that moment that you actually put into practice and realize it for yourself, it doesn't mean anything. So even though I'm like, well, okay, yeah, not the exciting answer as you said, I'm like, I feel that though, that someday I'll be like, oh, of course, yeah, like
Yeah.
I knew this all along, but now I understand. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what else I was gonna say? Yeah, just yeah. I mean, the when you begin to know like the like gift of sitting in presence and with the body is that it really does move things from this like intellectual understanding. And when you begin to feel it in your body, you're like, oh shit, like this is the thing that that I've been trying to like develop or work on. Oh, I remember what I was gonna say. And also like this is just remembering that this is a practice, and like some days you'll fall off the wagon and some days you'll be imperfect at it, and like it might feel like it's taking a really long time, but it's the like it's the devotion to it. Like that's the word. And again, not it's a devotion to yourself. It's like I am important enough. I'm important enough to do this work and to show up for myself in this way.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. um, yeah. Any final like thoughts or like lingering questions or anything?
I mean, it's big work. So you know, in some ways, like I'm you know I'm glad to have the perspective of like starting small and keeping one promise to yourself, because otherwise I would get overwhelmed. But at the same time, it's as big as reorienting my entire relationship um, to myself. So yeah, I don't think I have any lingering questions. I think that's plenty of work to
Yeah.
do.
You're set for the next 40 years.
Right, yeah, yeah, I think I've got like a 10-year plan of, of self work to do. But I really appreciate that perspective, and also just like hearing someone else say like that I'm significant. Like sometimes hearing it from someone who is not super close to you, although I feel great energy with you and I appreciate this, but it's easy for me to discount people close to me because I'm like, you have reasons for saying that, but and it made me realize how important it will be to say it for myself. Like the amount of feelings that welled up when you reframed it as what you're saying is you're insignificant in my body made me realize the extent to which my whole like being in the world is very rooted in this. So I know now the power of saying the opposite will have similar and contradictory effects. And so I think just literally saying that to myself is going to be a practice that I want to cultivate.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the like, I don't know if it's beauty, but like oftentimes, so if we like I am significant or like say that in the mirror to ourselves or repeat it, like because there's so much of the like whether we're like holding wounding around that or whatever, the like sort of the polar of that in our bodies, like it will get kicked up by that. So um I don't know if you're like ever looking for a way to like kick it up so you can process it. There it is,
Yeah. Also, if I want to go into a career in acting, I know what to say to myself now to bring the emotion, bring the tears.
Totally.
Method acting. That's the silver lining.
Yes, yes. Totally. Well, thank you so much for your question and your vulnerability and like sharing this with me and with um, the folks who are going to watch this. I appreciate it. And it like, yeah, I just, something that like so many of us are holding in our bodies. And so I know that like your story will, like, your question will resonate with other folks. So just thank you for like being the like holder of that, the like model of that in this space. So I'm gonna stop the recording now, but if you want to like hang out on the Zoom call, I'll like, so I'm just gonna stop the recording.